Hello, my name is Alexander Kolar, and I worked on this project with Janaya Marsh, Robert Kane, and Inder Singh. And we are here today to talk to you about the economic growth and income inequality in the United States over the years of 1990 to 2024. Today, we are just going to introduce economic growth overall through GDP and the income inequality over the years in the United States. So, first of all, to start it off, let me introduce our goal. Our goal is to show the relationship between the overall economic growth and income inequality in the United States, again, over the period of 1990 to 2024. We believe that they are related somewhat. So we believe as the GDP rises, the income inequality will also rise. Not looking back at the facts that crashed our GDP and things like that. So some of the sources that we used are the World Bank, the Federal Reserve Economic Data, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, BA for short. We use that to find the GDP and the economic indicators for our graphs, and it kind of helped us a lot. And then the other sources we used for the income inequality that helped us were the World Bank World Development Indicators, OECD Income Distribution Databases, and the U.S. Census Bureau. This kind of helped us find the overall income of families, as you'll see in the graphs, and just a bunch more information that we used. Next, we're going to be talking about a lot of figures that we got for these variables. And as you can see on the chart on the right, we got this from the Fred site, and this is the constant GDP per capita for the United States. And since 1990, there's been an almost constant growth, not talking about the almost like impacts as we see in 2019 and 2020 that COVID gave us, and then the Great Depression and the stock market crash, obviously. Those kind of tanked the GDP for us for a bit, but as we can see, there was a strong rebound. And we can just see that at about 1990, the GDP was about 40,000, and now it's about just around 67,000. And this suggests a strong long-run economic growth over the period of 1990 to 2024. And yeah, that's pretty much it. As I said, we were talking about how COVID crashed the stock, not the stock market, the GDP over this period of time, and like the stock market crash and the Great Depression also influenced this, which we'll be talking about later in this presentation. So now Janaya is going to be talking about more figures and about income inequality. Thank you.
This chart compares real GDP with real median household income from 1984 to 2020. As we can see in this chart, real GDP outpaces the median income of households. This signals income inequality over time. The next slide shows framework GDP of income inequality. The GIN index is from 1967 to 2023. The GIN index measures inequality from 1990 to 2023. The GIN graph has exponentially grown. The increase in GIN shows the income and inequality has been rising since the 1990s and has greatly outgrown GDP. Framework of income and inequality. This graph shares the total of household net worth held by the top 1% of the wealth distribution. The top 1% shares rises from about 22 to 23% in 1990 and around 30% in recent years. Together with the rising GIN and higher real GDP per capita, this shows that more gains from the growth go to the wealthiest household.
One of the major recent events, which is the COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermaths. First in 2020, when COVID hit, GDP basically collapsed and businesses shut down, people lost jobs, and output dropped sharply. At the same time, inequality behaved in a mixed way. Some households were hit very hard, but stimulus checks and unemployment benefits helped offset some of the damage for lower income workers. Then from 2021 to 2024, as the economy reopened, GDP rebounded. Most people went back to work, and so the income and wage equality actually narrowed down for a bit for workers. However, wealth inequality continued to increase. Asset prices and inflation rose, and that tended to benefit people who already owned stocks, and houses were more expensive, so that only raised the prices more. So COVID gave us a big drop in GDP, and then fast recovery and mixed effects on inequality. This right here is a AD and ADS model for two different periods. On the bottom, we have real GDP, and on the side, the price level. The vertical dashed lines, LRAS 0 and LRAS 1, are potential GDP over time. As technology, capital, and labor force grow, potential outward shifts right from LRAS 0 to LRAS 1. The downward curves are aggregate demand in two periods, AD 0 and AD 1. The upward curves are short-run aggregate supply, SRAS 0, SRAS 1. The points E0 and E1 are the AD and SRS intersecting points. So they show the actual GDP and price level in each period. So this picture separates long-run growth and short-run changes in demand and supply. This one right here is a closer look at the events themselves, and I also added the 2008 crisis in here. So the green curve labeled at 2008 is moves leftward because of leftward as the households cut spending and businesses cut investment. So 80 moves left. Where it meets SRAS, real GDP is below potential and unemployment is higher. The next one is the yellow 80 curve, which is the 2020 COVID. This is a even bigger shift of 80 because of lockdowns and uncertainty, which also caused a sharp decline in GDP and huge job losses. The next is the recovery, which is 2021 to 2023, which is the 80 curve. That shows recovery. Stimulus checks, extra unemployment payments, and low interest rates push the spending up to shift 80 back to right. The GDP recovers towards potential, but the gains in wealth are the strongest for people who already own assets. So wealth inequality continues to rise.
Hello, I'm Robert Kane, and in this slide, we're going to go over our recommendations on how to reduce income inequality. So our first idea was to adjust tax brackets to reduce after-tax inequality. We were thinking about having like a more progressive tax reform so we can narrow the gaps by ensuring higher earners pay their fair share. So high earners will pay a little bit more tax while low earners will pay a little less in tax, just to narrow that gap a little bit. Our second idea was to expand access to key resources such as education, healthcare, and affordable housing. Improving access to these goods would increase economic mobility and hopefully reduce long-term inequality. And our third idea was to coordinate fiscal and monetary policies better than we have in the past. And we have examples of how we didn't do that good in the past. And in 2001 to 2003, we had tax cuts increased deficits while Fed lowered the interest rates. But as this happened, growth resumed, but inequality widened as it happened. And from 2020 to 2021, we had a massive fiscal stimulus during COVID paired with ultra low interest rates. This boosted recovery from COVID, but fueled asset inflation, and it benefited the wealthy even more. So that widened the gap a little bit more. So on this slide, we have our summary. So the problems we ran into during this assignment weren't too bad, but we had trouble finding the information and creating the graphs because some of the relevant information was not displayed on the websites where we made the graphs. So it was hard to get the right graphs, but we ended up finding enough information to display, so it didn't end up being too much of a problem. And if we had more time, we probably would have went more in depth with all our graphs and slides and stuff. I feel like we added another situation that impacted the GDP and income inequality, so we would have added a little more and expanded on what we already wrote. So thank you guys. for listening to our presentation, and I hope you guys learned something.